Lady Sybil, Navigator of House Trademarks, was transitioning from warp space to the Materium when one of the darkest events for mankind would occur. The Great Rift would form as the galaxy was torn asunder, and the vessel she was navigating aboard would re-emerge back into real space directly in the path of the opening Great Rift. The unquantifiable physical and supernatural forces of the Materium would inflict devastating damage upon the ship and crew. Despite their almost certain destruction, through enormous efforts the Navigator would play her part in enabling the ship to avoid total destruction, but would leave the catastrophe ruined physically, a broken shell of a body, though her mind was still fully intact. Many months have passed since I last explored a miniature or diorama if you don't qualify my terrain look, and in fact this is the second one since we looked at the artwork Hell by the artists Jake and Dinos Chapman, which you'll remember as the Darkest Diorama video. I've been recently following on Twitter Mikal or Mikal, he said both are fine, just FYI, who was working on an especially interesting, pretty major conversion. Now there's different terms to describe how much you're adapting or creating with a miniature, and for this model I would consider it to be a major conversion. It's using some base pieces from kits, but it's also using other elements that are cut, shaped and scratch-built green stuff, cabling, etc., brackets, other finished elements. Now this converted miniature is an Imperial Navigator. We'll look more at how it was made later, but Navigators in 40k are not true psychers as many assume, although their powers are by definition psychic in nature. They're specifically mutants who possess what is known as a Navigator gene, and this gifts them a third eye on their forehead. It enables them to perceive the lighthouse of the Emperor known as the Astronomicon, and this gives them the ability to navigate ships through the perilous warp and sense its tides and dangerous shifting nature to successfully guide ships safely in and out of warp space, so they're able to travel across the galaxy, across the various systems and sectors of the Imperium of Man. Unlike other psychers who are often used in military force and can appear anywhere across the worlds of the Imperium, the Navigators belong to noble families within the Navigators' Quarter on Holy Terra. They form what is known as the Navis Nobilite. It's broadly assumed that the Emperor had some role in the Navigators' origins, or at least their swell in numbers. This is largely due to the fact that their appearance around the time where it would have been necessary for humanity to utilize a beacon from Terra so as to expand its crusade far beyond the local systems and explore deeper into the galaxy seems very much a suspicious coincidence. But Navigators are more than somewhat frowned upon by elements of the Imperium due to their mutant genetic nature, and have to be tolerated as they are critically important for humanity. Without them, starships would only be able to travel short distances, skimming warp space, or risk becoming lost forever, torn apart through powerful warp eddies. And despite Navigators not wielding the extremely powerful range of psychic powers often seen with Imperial trained psychers, many still fear the dark and foreboding third eye of a Navigator. Their disturbing mutant and secretive nature leads to many stories and fables about the power of Navigators running through crews of ships, as well as the belief that many abuse their knowledge that they're indispensable to indulge in excesses and abuses above their station. And while undoubtedly many loyally serve the Imperium with purity and dedication, humans are never a species known for restraint or denial of dark desire, not least when their realization of personal impunity becomes clear to that individual. Some Navigators can be upsetting and outright disturbing to look upon due to the selective nature of their inbreeding so as to maintain the strength of their Navigator gene, and consequently their genetic pool has become corrupted over many millennia. Only a few tend to leave the heavily guarded quarters of the Navigators on Terra, with the remainder staying within its hidden confines. And the reality of what exists behind those doors is perhaps far more disturbing than many would like to admit, and this sits equally poorly with those in the Inquisition who are fanatical about maintaining purity of the human spirit. And were it not for them being entirely indispensable, many Inquisitors were like nothing more than breaking down the doors of the Navigators' Quarter and burning it to the ground along with its residents. Had the Emperor completed his Webway project prior to the conclusion of the Horus Heresy, it's very likely that this could have taken place, if not fully, then at least with a mind to heavily curtail the power and excess of the Navigator houses. And when it comes to either their powers or ordinary Imperial citizens fearing them as dark witches and sorcerers, these are not without justified reason. As mentioned previously, Navigators do not use psychic powers as most Imperial psychers do in a true sense. Instead, their powers are intrinsically linked to the Immaterium. Few, though, would designate them as psykers because they are more like mutants. Their powers do not so commonly and literally channel the warp, although some can do this. Instead, it's more about their knowledge and relationship of understanding the materium. Powers like looking through a mortal individual, staring into their soul, disrupting warp space so as to form localized warp storms to protect ships or avoid enemies or consume enemies. Some navigators can manipulate localized physics around an enemy to slow time around them, enough to avoid a blade or a projectile. Many of their powers, unsurprisingly, revolve around their third eye and involve piercing their target with unpleasant strength of vision, and this can enable them to nullify psykers, give them degrees of precognition, allow them to go days without sleep, although this must be made up later on so they don't go insane. They can also reveal the horrors of the warp to foes, leaving them collapsed gibbering wrecks with sobbing insanity. Navigators also can have a range of powerful offensive skills, and these are usually variations of unleashing specific elements of the warp on targeted foes. This can be to burn, blister, and boil their flesh away. The more corrupt the individual, the more powerful this immolation can be, and they can also simply snap open their third eye in an instant and blast the flesh from an enemy, leaving them quite literally stripped and collapsing into a pile of superheated bones with their shredded remains pasted anywhere around, often enough to quell any resistance their companions may have had to a navigator's power previously. Others could simply stun or hold their foe in place with a shock to their soul. Others might suffer instantaneous mental breaks, and they can strike through the physical shell and target an individual's essence, defeating those who seemed beyond physical harm. While many of a navigator's skills require control and skillful mental manipulation, most acting navigators could easily kill your average mortal just with a look. There are few groups or individuals within the Imperium, save for the Inquisition, rogue traders and administratum, who wield as much power as the ancient houses of the Navigators. They're often forgotten about within the context of much of the goings on across the galaxy, and they're very happy to stay that way, but make no mistake, they have significant power within the Imperium, and you know that they mean to keep it. They also hold immense wealth, and their influence is embedded throughout the worlds of mankind, because they operate largely in the shadows, but control elements and shifts of power in the Imperium that can only be lightly speculated about. They have significant ties with rogue traders and their noble dynasties, and undoubtedly have connections and influence also with the Mechanicus. They may have some level of influence with the Imperial forces, both the Astra Militarum and even the Adeptus Astartes. All of this will take place not in the open, they operate in the shadows, behind the scenes. They see the scheming plans of men, they predict and take actions to direct and further their own agendas. And one primary goal could likely be preemptively preparing for the day when they may become an unnecessary element to the Imperium and have laid plans to counter any move or action to extinguish their mutated kind from humanity. Now, this conversion captured my attention as soon as I saw its basic structure being laid out. Mikal was creating Mechanicus-like cabling from green stuff, and the composition of the framework in the liquid chamber for the Navigator obviously conjure comparisons from the Navigators in Dune. It's a really awesome looking concept to create and extremely well executed as well by Mikal. The final finished miniature looks not only excellently painted and finished, but completely unique as you would expect from any major conversion. Now, I also put a few questions to him about the process of creating this model, as I thought that would be particularly interesting to see, how this all came together. So first of all, I asked, was this conversion fully planned out, or was it a process of experimenting and finding what seemed the most appropriate? Mikal tells me that he was fooling around with the glass dome and some components, and when he picked up the servo hauler truck, this formulated the picture in his mind, to have a figure floating in some kind of liquid or gas, and from there it was just a case of some experimentation. It needed a stand for the dome to rest on, which later became the light source as well, and he says he tried to make a gothic roof on top, but it turned out very goofy looking, so went for the machinery instead, putting the gothic emphasis back on the model by building the arches. So mostly had the big picture and then worked organically from that. I also asked, was this a feature piece or designed to fit within an existing army? And he explained that he currently hasn't got a specific army and builds feature pieces from whatever comes to mind. Sometimes these can be related, but mostly are not. This is a great example of how many people who paint and create miniatures in 40k, they don't actually have to participate in the actual tabletop game to still enjoy the lore and universe of 40k. And this is something I think a lot of new people to the hobby of Warhammer don't always understand, so it's worth telling your friends or new people that are interested, it's not all about about the tabletop game. You can just collect the models, buy these pieces, get the painting, put that stuff together and just enjoy it for what it is. Enjoy the process of creation and painting. That's always been a very strong part of the hobby of Warhammer, along with the actual playing of the game. I also asked Michael what he's learned from this piece, and he tells me that he learned that working with resin is really fun, that he didn't run into as many problems as he thought he might do, but that's probably because the resin was contained within that glass dome, so it didn't have the issues of leaking and spilling. Also, he usually doesn't like to actually have LEDs in his miniatures. Some people take a lot of time to do this, but he finds that the light can become unnatural compared to the painting and lighting on a model. But in this instance, it works very well because the lighting is indirect. It shines through the resin and reflects onto the model. Next, what piece of advice would you choose to give somebody looking to try and start converting miniatures? And he says, have fun. Always a good one to start. If you're not having fun building it, you're not going to like the end result. So he says he'll often do some sketches as well before actually gluing pieces together, or use something like blue tack to test out a combination of pieces together. This is going to give you an idea of whether or not it's going to work before you fully commit to actually putting it together. Having all the details planned out in your head can even though hold you back, as it's going to be more difficult to then realize this. So just start building with what you have and see where you end up. And I kind of definitely second that. Some of the best decisions and creations you can make can definitely happen organically, although it always helps to have some kind of a loose plan to go along with that. And then lastly, I said, if you're building this model again, would you do anything differently? And he says, yes, for pouring out that resin, I'd probably keep the roof and the navigator as separate pieces. So hanging the navigator into the dome by some little beams over the dome so that the top could then be open to pour the resin in multiple sessions. As the roof was glued to the navigator, he had to pour it all in one go and then just hope for the best, because this layer was much deeper than the maximum recommended of 5 centimeters. But then again, he says very happy with how it turned out, so maybe this actually wasn't necessary. And he says that he probably would do it differently, but doesn't know if the results would be any better, but at least that handling the model would be much easier if you'd done it this way, where it's separated out. I think that's just generally a good rule, and it's something that I've learned myself through painful experience over time, that yes, painting your models and generally assembling elements is much better done separately than putting it all together. And this was a really fantastic conversion. I enjoyed watching this develop over many days through his Twitter account feed, and you can find both this and his Instagram link below the video in the notes section. Now, whenever it comes to painting or miniature conversions, as I said on my terrain video, you never stop learning. Personally, I hadn't actually seen the creation of these green stuff cables before now, and perhaps I'll do a short video on how to showcase this, as I've actually already got the elements and the tools to do that myself. I also want to show you guys soon how to best strip paints from miniatures to salvage your old minis or save money by getting some off of eBay. Now, I've covered this in the past, but I want to do an updated video showing you a couple of different methods and also just talking about it more. I should also put together a short video explaining some of the definitions when it comes to adapting and creating your own sculpts and builds, just so you got some clarity there. So I'll just finish by saying thanks for watching as always. I hope you enjoyed this look at a very awesome conversion. I'll look to put together more diorama and mini focused videos as an ongoing process. If you did enjoy the video, help me out, drop a like guys, check out the notes below for the sponsors, and I'll see you next time for some more Warhammer 40,000.